They thought they buried me, but they didn't know I was a seed. When they broke me, they didn't realize they were preparing the ground for my resurrection. There are moments in life when you feel shattered. Not just hurt, but broken. The kind of breaking that leaves you questioning your worth, your purpose, even your faith. Maybe people betrayed you. Maybe your dreams collapsed. Maybe you prayed and nothing seemed to change. You stood in the middle of the storm, wondering if God was even listening. But I'm here to tell you today, God never wastes your breaking. Every tear you cried was counted. Every season of silence had purpose. And while others thought your story was over, heaven was working on a new chapter. You see, people can break your heart, your trust, even your plans, but they cannot break God's design for your life. What they meant for pain, God can turn into preparation. What they meant to destroy you, God can use to define you. So don't rush out of your breaking. Don't curse your pain. Because if you could see what God is building behind the scenes, you'd understand. You're not being destroyed, you're being rebuilt stronger. Stay with me through this message, because I'm going to show you exactly how God takes your breaking moments and turns them into building moments. How the same people who broke you will have to witness the strength God rebuilds in you. Sometimes life hits us in ways we never expected. Sometimes the people we trusted, the plans we invested in, and the dreams we nurtured seem to collapse all at once. You wake up one morning and feel as if the very ground beneath you has disappeared. And in those moments, the natural reaction is to panic, to question, to search for answers, to wonder if God has forgotten you. But the truth is, God never forgets you. What feels like breaking, what seems like destruction, is often divine intervention. God allows the breaking because He knows that the life you were building on your own cannot sustain the life He has planned for you. When God begins a rebuilding process, He doesn't start with the surface. He doesn't start with the exterior, the show, or the decoration. He starts with the foundation. You see, the foundation is everything. It is unseen to the world, but it is what holds up everything that will be built on top of it. And God knows that unless the foundation is right, everything else will eventually crumble. That is why sometimes He allows the things in our lives to fall apart, so we can see what was holding us up, so we can recognize what was supporting us, and so we can discover whether it was truly Him or whether it was something of our own making. Many of us have built on shaky foundations without even realizing it. We put our confidence in people, in positions, in resources, in our own abilities, in temporary things, in things that were never designed to last. And sometimes it takes a breaking for us to recognize this. God allows these moments because He wants to reveal the truth. He wants us to see where our reliance has been misplaced, where our trust was too shallow, where we were counting on the wrong support. He allows us to lose what we can never take with us into the next season, so that we can be prepared to receive what He wants to give. He allows us to be stripped of the temporary so that we can grasp the eternal. He allows the collapse of the old to make way for the construction of something new, something greater, something that will withstand the storms of life, something that cannot be shaken by the trials that are yet to come. Breaking is not the opposite of God's plan. It is part of God's plan. In fact, it is often the first step in a process that will take you from what you are to what you were created to be. The Bible says in Jeremiah 18 that the potter has the right to take the clay and reshape it into what he desires. And if you are like clay in the hands of the potter, then sometimes God allows the pressure, the heat, and the breaking so that you can be reshaped into something stronger, something more resilient, something more enduring. You may not understand it when it is happening, but in the hands of God, nothing is wasted. Every circumstance, every trial, every heartbreak, every failure, every disappointment is being used by Him to build a foundation that cannot be moved. You may feel as though you are falling apart, but God is putting together the pieces that will hold up your future. Many times the breaking comes in relationships. People we love, people we trust, people we count on. They may disappoint us, betray us, leave us, or fail us in ways that feel unbearable. But God allows this breaking to reveal the truth about the foundation of our lives. He allows the removal of what is unstable so that He can build on what is stable. He allows us to feel the emptiness, the loneliness, the loss, because it draws us closer to Him. When everything else is gone, the only thing left is God. And it is in that place, when all else has been stripped away, that the foundation of our faith is revealed. It is in the silence, in the stillness, in the breaking, that we learn to rely not on what we see, not on what we can control, but on the one who holds everything together. Breaking also comes in seasons of failure. Dreams that were supposed to flourish seem to die. Efforts that should have yielded results produce nothing. Plans that were carefully thought out fall apart. And in those moments, it is easy to think that God has forgotten, that He does not care, that the end has come. But the truth is that failure often precedes the foundation. God allows the collapse of our plans to teach us that our foundation must be built on Him, not on our understanding, not on our abilities, not on our strategies. He wants us to learn that His ways are higher than our ways and that His timing is perfect. He allows the failure so that we can become dependent on Him, so that we can be trained in humility, and so that we can understand that nothing we can build on our own can compare to what He wants to do in us and through us. Financial loss, career setbacks, family struggles, these are all forms of breaking that God can use to reveal the foundation of our lives. When our resources fail, when our plans collapse, when the support systems we trusted vanish, we discover the true source of our strength. And that is not people, that is not circumstances, that is God. He allows these things to happen not to punish us, but to teach us. Not to harm us, but to prepare us. Not to shame us, but to shape us. And when we finally recognize the truth, when we finally see that God is our foundation, we are ready for the rebuilding that follows. We are ready for the construction that He wants to begin in our lives. The foundation God builds is unlike anything the world can provide. It is eternal. It is unshakable. It is invisible to the eyes of men, but undeniable in its strength. It is built on His promises, His word, His presence, and His power. And when God begins to build, He does not simply restore what was lost. He builds something greater. He builds something stronger. He builds something that will not only endure the trials of life, but will also glorify Him. And this is why breaking is necessary, because if we could skip the breaking, we would skip the foundation. And without the foundation, anything we try to build is temporary, fragile, and vulnerable. When you are in a season of breaking, remember that God is revealing your foundation. Remember that He is stripping away what is unstable so that He can replace it with something that will last. Remember that every loss, every failure, every betrayal, every disappointment is a divine tool in the hands of the Master Builder. God is not done with you. He is not finished with your story. He is not finished shaping you, preparing you, strengthening you. And when the rebuilding begins, you will stand on a foundation that cannot be shaken, a foundation that is solid, secure, and unmovable. And the people who saw you broken, who thought you were defeated, will witness a strength that only comes from God, a resilience that only comes from faith, and a life that only God could have rebuilt. Sometimes life seems determined to crush us. Sometimes the weight of disappointment, betrayal, loss, and failure presses down so heavily that it feels like we will never recover. And in those moments it is easy to feel defeated, to question God, to wonder if the pain will ever end. But the truth is that brokenness is not the opposite of God's plan. It is often the doorway into it. God uses brokenness as a divine invitation, a calling to let Him reconstruct what has been damaged, reframe what has been misunderstood, and restore what has been lost. The brokenness you feel today is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of your transformation. When God allows brokenness, He is preparing the way for divine reconstruction. He is saying, I will not leave you as you are. I will rebuild you, reshape you, and renew you. The world may see ruins, but God sees raw material. Every shattered dream, every failed relationship, every lost opportunity, every disappointment is an ingredient God can use to build something far greater than what existed before. When a seed is broken and buried in the ground, it appears dead, lifeless, and forgotten. But in that breaking, life is being formed. In that dark soil, roots are taking hold. In that hidden place, strength is developing. God works in the same way with us. What feels like death, what seems like destruction, is actually preparation. God is reshaping us in ways that we cannot yet see, molding us in ways that are not visible to human eyes, and strengthening us in ways that only eternity can fully reveal. If you are in a place of brokenness, you are not abandoned. You are not forgotten. You are not finished. God is at work, and He is inviting you to surrender to the process, to trust the hands that are rebuilding, to allow Him to reconstruct what has been broken. Brokenness exposes what is truly inside us. It reveals the depth of our faith, the strength of our character, and the resilience of our spirit. It shows us where we have relied on ourselves and where we have relied on God. It strips away pride, selfishness, and false confidence. And while it may feel painful, it is also liberating. Because when everything else falls away, what remains is the part of us that cannot be shaken. The part of us that is grounded in God's love, sustained by His promises, and strengthened by His Spirit. This is why God allows brokenness not to punish us, but to prepare us, not to hurt us, but to help us, not to destroy us, but to develop us into vessels capable of carrying His glory. Divine reconstruction does not happen overnight. It is a process. It is a journey that begins in the ashes of brokenness and moves toward a life rebuilt stronger than before. Sometimes it begins with healing, the healing of wounds that have left scars, the mending of hearts that have been torn, the restoration of trust that has been broken. Sometimes it begins with perspective, understanding that what we have lost was never meant to define us, that the setbacks we have endured were only temporary, that God's plan for us is greater than what we have imagined. Sometimes it begins with preparation, learning new skills, developing new habits, cultivating new attitudes, and building resilience that will carry us through the storms that are yet to come. Every brokenness has a purpose. Every trial has a lesson. Every disappointment has a design. When God allows brokenness, He does so to teach us dependence, humility, patience, and faith. He allows brokenness to strip away what is unnecessary so that the essential can be revealed. He allows brokenness to remove what is false so that the authentic can emerge. He allows brokenness to open our eyes to His power, our hearts to His love, and our lives to His plans. Nothing is wasted in the hands of God. Every tear, every hurt, every struggle becomes a building block in the construction of a life that is stronger, wiser, and more aligned with His will. The process of divine reconstruction often begins with surrender. It begins with recognizing that we cannot rebuild ourselves. We cannot repair our own brokenness with human effort, willpower, or understanding. We need God. We need His wisdom, His guidance, His strength, and His Spirit. And when we surrender our brokenness to Him, something remarkable happens. The pieces that seemed scattered begin to come together. The cracks that seemed permanent begin to be filled. The emptiness that seemed unfillable begins to be restored. God takes what was shattered and transforms it into something functional, beautiful, and lasting. Brokenness also cultivates empathy, compassion, and sensitivity. When we experience suffering and pain, we learn to understand the struggles of others. We develop hearts that are tender, spirits that are compassionate, and lives that can minister to others in ways we could never have done without experiencing brokenness ourselves. What we endure is never wasted. It is recycled into purpose, ministry, and testimony. The broken pieces of our past become instruments of blessing for others, evidence of God's power, and proof that He can take what is imperfect and make it extraordinary. God's reconstruction is not limited to one area of life. He rebuilds relationships, restores dreams, strengthens faith, revives hope, and revitalizes purpose. He turns failures into foundations, losses into lessons, pain into power, and scars into symbols of strength. The same hands that allowed the breaking are the hands that bring the building. The same Spirit that permitted the tears is the Spirit that brings joy. The same God who allowed the storm is the God who brings the calm, the restoration, and the resurrection of what was broken. Sometimes, God's reconstruction begins with a shift in perspective. He changes the way we see ourselves, the way we see others, and the way we see our circumstances. What once seemed like the end becomes the beginning. What once felt like a curse becomes a blessing. What once appeared to be failure becomes a step toward success. God transforms the rubble of our lives into stepping stones, the ashes into opportunity, the pain into purpose, and the brokenness into beauty. You may not understand why you are in a season of brokenness. You may not see the plan behind the pain. You may not feel the purpose in the process. But God sees it all. He knows what He is doing. He knows how long it will take. He knows how deep the reconstruction must go. And He will not leave the work incomplete. He will not abandon the building. He will not stop until you are fully rebuilt, fully restored, fully empowered, and fully aligned with His will for your life. Brokenness is not a signal of failure. It is an invitation to faith. It is not a mark of defeat. It is a call to trust. It is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of God's masterpiece in your life. Every time you have been hurt, disappointed, or let down, God has been preparing you for a comeback. Every time you have felt broken, God has been preparing you for reconstruction. Every time you have been pressed, crushed, or shattered, God has been preparing you for purpose. And when you finally surrender your brokenness to Him, when you finally allow His hands to work in your life, you will discover that what was broken is now beautiful. What was lost is now found. What was dead is now alive. And what was weak is now stronger than ever before. There are seasons in life when it seems as if God has gone silent. You pray and it feels like your words vanish into the air. You cry out and there is no answer. You wait and nothing changes. The storms rage on, the pain persists, and the disappointment deepens. It is in these moments that the enemy whispers lies. God has abandoned you. Your prayers don't matter. You are alone in this struggle. But these lies are the opposite of the truth. The silence of God is not the absence of God. It is not rejection, it is not abandonment, and it is not indifference. It is often the very space in which He is working most powerfully, preparing the ground for what is coming, building strength in ways that cannot be rushed, and shaping a life that will reflect His glory. When we experience God's silence, it is easy to become discouraged. It is easy to try to fix everything on our own, to make hasty decisions, to lean on our own understanding, or to give up on faith altogether. But the reality is that God's silence is intentional. It is purposeful. It is a divine pause designed to teach patience, develop endurance, and strengthen reliance on Him. Just as the farmer waits for the rain to nourish the soil, just as the seed must remain in the dark earth before it sprouts, so we too must sometimes wait in silence before God moves. In that waiting, character is formed. Faith is tested. Trust is deepened, and strength is built that cannot be shaken by the trials that lie ahead. Many of us struggle because we equate God's silence with inactivity. We see nothing happening, and we assume nothing is happening. But God often works behind the scenes in ways that are invisible to us. Just because we cannot see the wind does not mean the wind is not moving the sails. Just because we cannot hear the potter does not mean He is not shaping the clay. Just because we do not understand what God is doing does not mean He has forgotten us. The silence is not empty, it is full of purpose. It is in the silence that God strengthens our spirit, aligns our steps, and prepares our hearts for the breakthroughs that are coming. God's silence also teaches us dependence. When He does not answer immediately, when He does not intervene in the timing we desire, we are forced to rely not on our own abilities, not on the people around us, and not on the circumstances we see, but on Him. Dependence on God is not something we learn in the moments of ease, comfort, or immediate answer. It is cultivated in the quiet, in the waiting, in the seasons when we feel abandoned. It is then that our faith is tested and our trust is refined. Just as gold is purified in fire, our faith is strengthened in silence. Silence from God is also an invitation to listen. When He does not speak in ways we expect, when He does not answer immediately, we are encouraged to draw closer, to listen more intently, and to seek His presence with greater intensity. In that space, we begin to hear the subtle promptings of His Spirit, the gentle nudges of His Word, and the quiet assurance that He is still at work. Silence is never empty when God is present. It is filled with opportunity, revelation, and preparation. We begin to realize that God's timing is perfect, His plan is flawless, and His methods are far beyond our understanding. The silence of God can also produce resilience. When we are not given instant solutions, immediate answers, or quick deliverance, we are forced to endure, to persevere, and to grow stronger. Every trial, every moment of waiting, every unanswered prayer becomes a training ground for endurance. It teaches us to hold on when everything around us says let go. It teaches us to trust when everything around us says doubt. It teaches us to hope when everything around us says despair. And in the process, God builds within us a strength that cannot be borrowed, cannot be faked, and cannot be shaken. History is full of examples of God's people who experienced long seasons of silence. Abraham waited decades for the promise of a son. Joseph languished in a pit and a prison for years before his dreams were realized. Moses wandered in the wilderness for 40 years before leading a nation to freedom. David waited years to ascend the throne. Each of these lives demonstrates that God's silence does not mean his absence. It means preparation. It means shaping. It means timing. What seems like delay is often divine design. What feels like abandonment is often divine alignment. What appears as emptiness is often full of unseen provision and preparation. The silence of God also reveals our true hearts. In the waiting, we see where our faith is genuine and where it is shallow. We discover what we truly rely on and what we are merely clinging to for comfort. We learn the difference between a faith that depends on outcomes and a faith that trusts in God Himself. Silence separates superficial belief from authentic faith. It challenges us to cultivate patience, humility, and obedience, even when there is no visible evidence that our prayers have been heard. During seasons of silence, God often uses the time to cultivate intimacy. When He does not answer in the way we expect, we are drawn closer to Him. Our conversations become more personal, our dependence more profound, and our relationship more intimate. We learn to speak to Him not only with requests, but with hearts laid bare, with confessions, with gratitude, with longing, and with trust. Silence teaches us to commune with God in ways that transcend words, to connect with Him in the depth of our spirit, and to experience His presence even when His voice seems distant. God's silence is never a sign of His weakness. It is not a lack of interest or power. It is not because He is too busy or too far away. On the contrary, it is often a sign of His sovereignty and His wisdom. He sees the bigger picture. He knows the outcome before the beginning. He knows the dangers we cannot see, the lessons we must learn, and the strength we must develop. Silence is part of His perfect plan to prepare us for the destiny He has for us. When you find yourself in a season of silence, remember that God is still present. Remember that He is still at work. Remember that He has not abandoned you, forgotten you, or forsaken you. Your season of silence is not meaningless. It is full of purpose. It is a space where God builds your character, strengthens your faith, and aligns your steps. It is a season that, when embraced with trust and patience, will produce a testimony, a strength and a depth of relationship with God that could not have been gained any other way. Even in the silence, God speaks in ways that are subtle, in ways that are profound, and in ways that transform. He speaks through Scripture, through the whispers of the Spirit, through circumstances, through the encouragement of others, and through the quiet assurance that He is near. The silence is not a void, it is a place where God prepares a breakthrough, constructs a foundation, and strengthens the inner man so that when He finally speaks, when He finally moves, when He finally delivers, the results are more powerful, more lasting, and more glorious than we could have imagined. Pain is something no one desires, yet it is an inescapable part of life. It comes in many forms. The loss of a loved one, betrayal by a friend, failure in a career, disappointment in dreams, or the crushing weight of unmet expectations. At first, pain feels like an enemy. It feels like something to resist, something to escape, something that diminishes us. We ask ourselves why it happened, how it could have been avoided, and whether it will ever end. But the truth is that pain is not just a curse, it is also a tool in the hands of God. Pain is the refining fire that produces power. Pain is the pressure that reveals potential. Pain is the crucible in which strength, character, and faith are forged. What feels unbearable today can become unstoppable tomorrow. What seems like destruction now can become the foundation of divine empowerment. The greatest examples of power in Scripture were born out of pain. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and imprisoned for years. His life seemed shattered, yet from his pain emerged a man of influence, wisdom, and authority. Job lost his family, his health, and his wealth, yet in the depth of his suffering his faith grew, and he became stronger than before. David faced betrayal, rejection, and relentless opposition, yet each trial molded him into a man after God's own heart. Pain is never wasted in God's economy. Every sorrow, every trial, every heartache carries within it the seeds of power waiting to be released. Pain teaches us endurance. It stretches us beyond our comfort zone and pushes us into areas where we must rely on God in ways we never have before. Endurance is not developed in seasons of ease. It is cultivated in storms. It grows when we refuse to give up, when we rise each time we fall, and when we choose faith over fear. Pain strengthens the muscles of our spirit. It trains our hearts to trust God more deeply. It teaches us patience when answers are delayed and courage when challenges seem impossible. The power that emerges from pain is not superficial, it is lasting, resilient, and transformative. Pain also produces empathy and compassion. When we experience suffering, we gain a unique understanding of the struggles of others. Our hearts become tender, our spirits sensitive, and our lives capable of ministering to others in ways we never could have before. The scars we carry are not just reminders of what we endured, they are tools for blessing, vessels through which God can pour His love, comfort, and guidance into the lives of those who are hurting. Every tear we shed becomes part of the testimony that brings hope and encouragement to others. Another way pain produces power is by refining our focus. When life is comfortable and smooth, distractions are easy, and priorities can become skewed. Pain has a way of cutting through the noise, stripping away the superficial, and forcing us to concentrate on what truly matters. It brings clarity, sharpens our vision, and directs our energy toward God's purpose. It is in the crucible of suffering that our true priorities are revealed, our motivations examined, and our faith strengthened. What we once thought was essential may fall away, leaving only the eternal and the significant. Pain develops perseverance. Perseverance is the ability to keep moving forward even when the road is rough. The obstacles seem insurmountable and the destination appears unreachable. It is forged in the fires of difficulty, tempered by repeated challenges, and reinforced through the discipline of continued faithfulness. Those who have never known pain often lack the depth of perseverance that enables them to overcome great adversity. But those who have walked through suffering, who have been tested, tried, and refined, emerge with a resilience that is unshakable. Pain produces a power that is not dependent on circumstance but rooted in experience, growth, and faith. Pain also drives dependence on God. When we rely on our own strength, we are limited by what we can see, do, and understand. Pain exposes the limits of self-reliance and points us to the one who is limitless. In moments of suffering, we learn to call upon God, to trust His wisdom, to seek His guidance, and to rely on His power. Dependence on God is the source of spiritual strength, and pain is the teacher that shows us how much we need Him. The power that comes from pain is always accompanied by a deeper intimacy with God, a closer walk with Him, and a greater understanding of His presence in our lives. Pain also inspires transformation. Just as pressure transforms coal into diamonds, pain transforms our character. It breaks down pride, humility, and shapes perseverance. It dismantles fear, doubt, and insecurity. It exposes weakness so that strength can be built. It brings lessons that comfort cannot teach, challenges that ease cannot create, and growth that comfort cannot produce. Those who endure pain under God's guidance do not simply survive, they are transformed into stronger, wiser, and more capable individuals. The power derived from pain is both internal and external. It is strength of character, depth of faith, and resilience of spirit. The testimony that emerges from pain is another manifestation of the power it produces. When we rise from suffering, when we overcome the trials that seemed impossible, our lives become a testimony to God's faithfulness. People who watch our journey see the transformation, the perseverance, and the strength that could only have come from God. Pain produces a credibility that comfort cannot create, a witness that words cannot convey, and an authority that only experience can validate. The power of our testimony is not in the absence of pain, but in the presence of triumph despite pain. Pain also develops courage. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the ability to act in spite of fear. When we have been broken, wounded, or tested, we gain courage that is born from survival. We develop a boldness to face challenges we would have previously avoided, a confidence rooted in experience rather than circumstance, and a faith that trusts God even when the outcome is uncertain. This courage, forged in the furnace of pain, becomes a source of power that propels us forward, enables us to inspire others, and positions us for opportunities that would have been impossible without it. Finally, pain produces power by teaching reliance on God's promises. When everything else fails, human wisdom, financial resources, personal strength, the promises of God remain. Pain drives us to the Word of God, to the assurance of His covenant, and to the hope that never disappoints. Those who have endured suffering and emerged victorious understand the reliability of God in a way that those who have only known ease cannot. The power gained from pain is inseparable from a faith that has been tested, refined, and proven true in the fires of adversity. There are times in life when it feels like everything is lost. Dreams lie in pieces. Relationships are shattered. Opportunities seem to have vanished. It can feel as if the very ground we stood on has been swept away, leaving us in a void of disappointment and despair. But the beauty of God's work is that restoration is always greater than the ruin. What has been broken, battered, or destroyed is not the end of the story. God specializes in taking what seems hopeless, what appears irreparable, and what others have given up on, and transforming it into something stronger, more fruitful, and more glorious than we could have imagined. The Bible reminds us in Job that the latter days are greater than the former. God does not merely restore, He exceeds, He multiplies, and He elevates what has been lost. Restoration in God's hands is never a return to the old. It is a step into something higher, deeper, and more powerful. The first aspect of God's restoration is the transformation of perspective. When we experience ruin, we tend to focus on what was lost, on what could have been, and on what should have happened. We mourn the past sometimes for years, allowing the weight of regret to dominate our hearts. But God's restoration changes the way we see our circumstances. He teaches us to look beyond the loss, to trust His plan, and to focus on what He is building in the aftermath. What was once a setback becomes a setup. What seemed like destruction becomes the prelude to breakthrough. God's restoration is not just about replacing what was lost. It is about giving us eyes to see the greater possibilities He has in store. Restoration also brings renewed purpose. When life falls apart, it can leave us feeling directionless, questioning our calling, and unsure of our next steps. God uses the ruins of our past to realign us with His will. The experiences that brought us pain, disappointment, or failure are never wasted. They are building blocks for the mission He has for our lives. Just as a gardener prunes branches to encourage stronger growth, God allows seasons of ruin to prune our lives, remove what is unnecessary, and prepare us for a renewed purpose. Restoration is more than repair. It is the launch pad for divine destiny, a reawakening of calling, and a redefinition of potential. One of the most powerful aspects of God's restoration is the multiplication that often follows. When He restores, He does not simply give back what was taken. He multiplies it. Abraham's story demonstrates this beautifully. He lost his home, faced famine, and struggled with delayed promises, yet when God restored, He gave more than he had ever imagined. The widow of Zarephath had almost nothing, yet God restored her provision and multiplied her resources during the time of famine. God's restoration is never limited by the magnitude of the ruin. It is always greater than the loss, larger than the setback, and stronger than the destruction. What seems final in the natural is just the beginning in the hands of God. God's restoration also strengthens character. When we face ruin, we are tested, refined, and shaped. It is in these moments that patience is cultivated, perseverance is developed, and faith is deepened. Restoration is not always instant because the process is meant to teach us endurance, reliance on God, and the depth of His love. Those who have been broken and then rebuilt by God carry a strength that is unshakable, a confidence that is unshakable, and a faith that is unshakable. The restoration is as much about the person as it is about the circumstances. God does not only restore what was lost, He restores us in ways that prepare us for what lies ahead. Another element of restoration is the revelation of God's faithfulness. When everything seems lost, when the world says it's over, and when human help fails, God steps in to demonstrate that He is always present, always powerful, and always good. Restoration is the evidence of His promises fulfilled. It is the visible proof that He has never abandoned us, that He is working behind the scenes, and that His timing is perfect. Every story of restoration becomes a testimony, a living example that God is greater than any loss, stronger than any storm, and more faithful than any circumstance. Restoration also invites gratitude and worship. When God restores, we gain a new appreciation for His grace, His provision, and His love. We learn to celebrate even the small victories, to rejoice in progress, and to trust Him with the bigger picture. Gratitude deepens our connection to God, opens our hearts to greater blessings, and reinforces the understanding that nothing in life is random. Restoration transforms our hearts as much as it transforms our circumstances. It teaches humility, reliance, and reverence for the God who rebuilds what was broken. Moreover, God's restoration often inspires hope and encourages others. When we rise from the ruins of our lives, our journey becomes a beacon for those facing similar struggles. Our restored life speaks louder than words ever could. It encourages those in despair to believe, to keep fighting, and to trust God's timing. Restoration is not only for personal benefit, it is a platform for ministry, testimony, and influence. What God restores in one life can spark faith and hope in countless others. The power of restoration goes beyond the individual. It becomes a ripple effect that touches generations. Restoration also requires faith and obedience. God does not restore automatically. He calls us to participate in the process through trust, patience, and alignment with His Word. Sometimes He asks us to release what we have been holding on to forgive those who have hurt us, to let go of bitterness, and to step into the future with faith. Restoration is a partnership between our surrender and His power. The more we trust Him, the more fully He can restore, rebuild, and multiply. It is in the alignment of our hearts with His will that the restoration is most complete and most powerful. The timing of restoration is also crucial. God restores in His perfect timing, not ours. We may want instant answers, quick fixes, or immediate miracles, but His restoration often takes shape gradually. Seasons of preparation, refining, and growth precede the fullness of what He has in store. Sometimes the delay is part of the blessing, allowing us to mature, to understand, and to appreciate the depth of His work. Patience in waiting, faith in His promises, and perseverance through the process allow God to restore fully, completely, and abundantly. Finally, restoration demonstrates the transformative power of God's love. What was once a scene of destruction becomes a canvas for His glory. What was once despair becomes a testimony of hope. What was once hopeless becomes a monument of faithfulness. Restoration is always greater than the ruin because God is never satisfied with merely replacing what was lost. He elevates, multiplies, strengthens, and beautifies. The scars of the past remain, not as reminders of defeat, but as evidence of God's power to transform, redeem, and restore beyond what we can imagine.